Hi, this is a supplement for week 4 for the Executive Black Belt class. This one covers Lean for Black Belts, the introduction, starting on slide 2.
So now this is entitled Lean for Black Belts. It's really kind of in two parts. There's an introduction, and we'll talk about things later in the course. We'll be talking about some things that you would learn in like an operations management course and in an MBA program, things like optimization, linear programming, and queuing theory. And even if you don't learn the theory, there's some nice things to know that the tools exist and that you can actually examine these things. And it's actually not that complicated to learn what are the basic questions that you want to ask, and I think that's valuable for green belts too. But it is what I would say advanced, certainly advanced, what people are calling advanced Lean. So we'll take a little bit of time to go through the introduction, and here's kind of what we'll cover throughout the. I do want to open this back up. I'm sorry. Throughout the course in Lean. So we'll talk about today. We'll talk about some of the goals and principles. We'll talk about some of the metrics, and then we'll spend some time, a good amount of time, talking about the nuts and bolts tools and the typical Lean solutions. That's what we're going to talk about today. We won't be talking about the goal. We won't be talking theory of constraints. We won't be talking about constraint optimization, queuing analysis, or process simulation. Okay. So without further ado, let's move on into some of this. So I'd like you to. So first of all, we want to make a bit of a distinction between Lean and Six Sigma. And I don't think you need to always make this distinction because typically the two tools and the two paradigms and the two methodologies can be meshed together pretty well. But they do have different origins. And for example, Six Sigma largely came from the quality movement. And so as such, it was looked at the techniques for, a lot of Six Sigma is about the techniques for reducing defects and reducing variation. Whereas Lean, most people talk about the Toyota production system. Lean came about through slightly different ideas and methodologies. But at its heart, Lean is really about reducing waste. Some other thing it's about are essentially, well, we'll talk about what are some of the wastes that we see, and one could say that some of these other things I put in here are about eliminating waste also. But there's a couple of key aspects of Lean that I wanted to point out. And that is that it's about teamwork, but in a cultural sense. So to really make the Toyota production system work, there has to be an effective culture change. It can't just be improvement teams, okay? And when I say it's about teamwork, what I mean is that it's about understanding your organization horizontally and not just vertically. Third thing is it's about speed. So most Lean practitioners, their first metrics of choice are around cycle time and reducing cycle time. In fact, I read a book, I'm trying to remember what book that was, Lean for the Small Shop or something like this, years ago. It was a Shingo Prize winner. Shigeo Shingo is a Lean guru. And it was basically, it was subtitled, "It's About Time," and with a double meaning of that phrase. But the argument for why it's about why speed is important is really about getting products to market faster, servicing customers more quickly, and also generating better cash flow So most lean practitioners talk about all three of those things. Now, most of basic lean you already get, and but what I can tell you is that sometimes in a lot of practices, people aren't focused on eliminating waste. They're focused on making their core processes even better or higher quality, whatever that means. It doesn't always mean the same thing. So lean helps you put your hat on and say, okay, if that's well and good that we want a high quality process, but maybe there are lots of things in here that we're actually not, or that we're actually doing that we shouldn't be doing. And if we stop doing them, we'd be better off. So there's lots of different things. There's lots of different things. You already get lean. Most people, and I think that the folks who are in at Baptist, you've already done a tremendous amount of work in lean. So so I think that there's a good understanding there. Okay, so let's talk through a little bit about maybe the distinction between when lean might be predominant and when Six Sigma might be predominant. One way of thinking about that is that Six Sigma tends to work on particular processes. So, for example, or particular steps of a process. So if this particular step was problematic and produced a lot of errors or a lot of variation, the tools for Six Sigma, data collection, deep data analysis, decisions on when to hire a contractor or not, Six Sigma may predominate. On the other hand, if the overall flow is an issue, which might be the time that it takes to make this whole thing happen, or maybe the way that units move through. Do they move through? Do they get clogged at various places? Are there bottlenecks? Lean tools and solutions can be, and lean thinking can be often helpful. Okay, and that's just what this says as well. All right, here are some of the key principles of lean on slide 8. And you'll see, I think, that most of these are not are in line with Six Sigma as well. So determine customer value, that certainly dovetails with Six Sigma. Making the value flow, we'll want to talk a little bit about that. We will want to talk a little bit about that, but that is one thing that is a little bit different with respect to Six Sigma and lean. Flow is a much more prevalent concept in lean, and I like to think about it this way. What flow really means, and I have here, is the customer pulls the value. There's lots of different things to think about for this, but one way of thinking about it would be to say that every time the customer wants your good or service, they're able to get it as soon as possible, and that all the processes or tasks that have to happen to make that delivery of that product or service possible go into action immediately without delay. So, for example, and we'll talk about this in an example later, when you go into Subway, and people are probably sick of this example, but when you go into Subway, they don't have all these sandwiches pre-made, but when you order something, they pull an order just for you, right? And they have to pull it immediately, otherwise it's not going to be valuable to you. All right, that's probably the simplest way to think about it. And the way that I learned it, the way that I learned this is to say, think about, I learned this in a manufacturing setting, so I learned it for product, but now lean is, of course, applied all over the place in service and product. But I learned it to say that products are impatient. So if you anthropomorphize your products, certainly people, it's easy enough. If you anthropomorphize your products, you start to think, well, they're impatient. They don't like to wait. And so it helps you see, when your paperwork or your transactions, your billing, anything like that is being held up. Okay, so that's the one thing that is definitely different. Understanding the value stream, we'll talk more about that later, but essentially at the moment now we can think of that as the horizontal as opposed to vertical process that things have to go through. Getting it right the first time, that certainly is very similar to a Six Sigma paradigm. Make our processes transparent. This isn't something that all lean folks talk about, but I like to specifically point it out because most lean tools will find, if you don't already know, are visually oriented. They're simply made to visually display waste and how much it's really killing you and killing your operations. So until you can see it, and in fact, I'm trying to think if it was, I don't think it was Womack and Jones who are essentially the two lean gurus, but the person who came out with Learning to See. By the way, I'd appreciate if anybody knows the author of Learning to See. If you could let everybody know who that is. But Learning to See is largely, that was the whole point, is that you can't see, if you can't see the waste, you can't do anything about it. So the lean tools and the metrics are about illuminating that. There's also an extra emphasis, I believe, in many lean programs on doing it right now. If you don't need to wait, why not? Why keep waiting? Why not do it right now? And finally, compete against yourself. This is also true in Six Sigma and in the quality world, but it is very explicitly pointed out in most lean organizations that the competition that you've got is yourself. So you're never really finished when you go through the steps to make a process lean. Guess what? You still have work to do. So those are some key principles that we can go on. Okay, so just as a very quick, sort of tactical view of this, many companies, and I think this is part of the whole culture change that we as black belts have to work to, whether it's Lean or Six Sigma, but that most companies see themselves as organized around departments, right? So if you're working with somebody who is, say, the COO, they're going to think mostly in terms of operations. If you're looking at product development, they're going to think mostly in terms of product development. Marketing thinks in terms of their own interests. And in fact, most metrics are also geared that way. So when we have many I've certainly reviewed many Greenbelt projects, and most Greenbelt projects tend to look like this. Here's their SIPOC, and their metrics are end to end from here. I'll just put E to E here. Their KOVs are siloed metrics. But the big problems, of course, are generally ones that go across value streams. This, by the way, is when I'm talking about a value stream, something that goes across many departments. If you think about it, the services that you give to your customer, if I have a customer over here, and maybe that same customer or a different customer over here, whether it's care delivery at a hospital, whether it's the administration or the completion of a sale with an employer, or whether it's finishing up a brake pad and delivering it to the distributor, that those things cross many departments and involve much more than simply the core operations. They involve all of these things. So first thing is to start thinking of your value, what we call our value streams, as they go horizontally, not vertically. So that means our metrics really should, for these particular value streams, should be metrics that encompass the end-to-end here. Our KOVs should be things that, for example, don't measure cycle time to complete this, right, but measure cycle time across this value stream. All right, I'm probably preaching to the choir at this point, so I'm going to move fairly quickly. The really relevant question is, so where do we start, and how do we define these value streams? Because I think once we create them, it'll make some sense. So I want to talk through a tool maybe that can help you to do that, okay, and sort of how to use that tool. But by the way, many companies advise that If you look at a company or a corporation, they can have multiple levels. Like, for example, and they can have more levels than this, too, but I've just written this. So maybe this is one of the things that can be looked at would be Baptist Health System. There's multiple businesses, right? There's multiple hospitals. I'll just say H1, H2, H3. And then there's multiple processes within each one of these hospitals. For many folks, people might say, you know, a good place to start would be here and say, what are the key value streams that each of these business units have to deliver on? In this case, there's a lot of commonality, but there may be some differences if you have outpatient clinics, things like that, convenient care clinics. They may have different value streams than the hospitals. If this were Connecticut, see if I can erase this just a moment. If this were Connecticut, we might be talking about here is, I believe, Emblem, and then CCI is the business here, and the cross. So that's kind of where we would start to define our value streams, and we look for the multiple the things that are that we do, the functional value streams at Connecticut. That seems like a reasonable place to start. So starting a value streaming initiative or a value stream initiative at Connecticut is right and proper. You don't have to go up or go down. All right. So how do we actually get to get to defining tactically what these value streams are and then looking at them cross-functionally? Well, one way of doing it is to list many of your processes, and I learned this as what was called PQR, product quality routing. And essentially what we would do is we would say, what are the different stations or build stations or measuring stations that we need to do I happen to learn it in the amplifier business. So what are the different build stations that we need to look at when we're making the different product lines? So I thought of these as different products, right? So I had a product A, product B, product C. You could look at them as services as well. And then I simply went through and I said, okay, for this particular service, do we need to go through estimate and quote it? Yes, no. If we do, put an X, otherwise put a no. And you'll start to see that there's a lot of commonality. So for example, this might say that these particular services would have their own value stream. Here's one value stream that we would want to look at. And these particular services, A and E and F, have another particular value stream. Here's another one, a value stream that we'd want to look at. Okay, so again, so tactically, what this would mean was, and I'd be guessing at Baptist, but this would mean, you know, you're going to have value streams very, very high level, like revenue cycle, care delivery, and so forth. But there's probably going to be value streams within, say, care delivery that you'd want to do. But there's also going to be some commonality. So, for example, you'll certainly have a process map and a value stream map for bowel surgery, but that may not be the main thing that defines the initiative. There may be other surgeries or other type of care, other type of procedures that could be looked at as having very, very similar value streams, and that can really help congeal the sort of model that you want to say, I have X number of value streams. And those value streams can have very, very similar metrics like cycle time or WIP, work in progress, or on-time delivery, all those sorts of things. Hopefully this is making some sense. By the way, I appreciate anybody I know Baptist, you have a very active program in Lean and doing value stream maps, and you're building that up. So it would be very helpful if you could, if anybody could share that. Maybe what are some of the value streams that you look at? Okay. What I can tell you is I worked at a company that had many medical practices, and they had 4 basic value streams that they went to each facility with. They had 4 value streams, so they had thousands of facilities. They went to each facility or each provider facility and medical practice, and they had 4 value streams. One was care delivery. One was revenue cycle. One was drug management, and one was referral cycle. Their revenue was very dependent on getting referrals and managing those referrals well. So they could go into any practice and have a common number of metrics, even if one was a pediatric care facility and the other maybe was an oncology facility or a radiology facility. But this gave them some very clear structure, and that's what the value stream did. Okay. Okay, so hopefully we'll move on, and I'll take any questions you have. But I do just want to say that in the next assignment, not the one that you've got right now, but in your next assignment, you'll be asked to do a little bit of writing down what your value streams are, and outline why is this the value stream you're looking at, as opposed to other things. Okay. All right. So I'll stop here, and we've finished through this particular section. I want to stop and ask you for any questions that you might have, if you have any questions.